today's topic, the majestic fjords of Norway. Again, a regular trip of ours. We look to hopefully run this every May because this is the best time of the year. But before we get into the nitty gritty of the itinerary, I just want to say a few words for our new members to Wheel and Anchor about who we are and how, what this is all about. And so Wheel and Anchor is a community that we started just about 5 years ago. In fact, I think it's this month, about 5 years ago, that my good friend and partner Joel and I put together the idea for this. And this follows on 30 years of organizing trips for Canadians to all parts of the world. And what I found during all this time is that, there's tour groups and there are groups of friends that go out traveling, and we kind of relate to the latter. We attract people into Wheel and Anchor who are, well-traveled, or not necessarily well-traveled as to a lot of places, but they understand what it means to be a traveler. And, this is where we often make the distinction between tourist and traveler. And, we've all been out into the world and we've seen, and you know how you sometimes get that, shiver down your spine, or you cringe when you see somebody kind of going, oh, you're sort of not engaging in a way that's respectful of where you are. And so it's hard to put exactly your finger on it. We're just in the process of actually updating kind of our philosophy and our traveler's creed that many of you may remember when you joined Wheel and Anchor, but it summarizes a bit our, the way that we like to go around the world, as Canadians, and with an appreciation, a respect for local culture, but also an inquisitiveness, and also out to have a good time, but not in a loud, raucous sense necessarily. Sometimes we're loud and raucous. We're allowed to do that too, but in a in a way that's very collegial. And it's like a bunch of friends going on a trip, and that's how our trips are put together with that intention. And in doing that, also we certainly become well connected, which is one of our goals for all of our members, that you become connected to other people, because a lot of people come back from our trip saying, I met these great folks, and now we're doing this and we're traveling together and we're flying to the other end of the country to meet each other, and you make friends along the way. And that's really important to us as well, because let's face it, it's the shared experience of travel that is what makes it even more rewarding. You can go out and do a lot of this stuff on your own, and come back and tell all your friends who aren't travelers, and they sort of look at you going, oh great, you're going to show me the slideshow now. But I think you get what I'm saying. And so this is what we are attracting into Wheel and Anchor, and invariably you become well-traveled along the way. I mean, this is, let's face it, the day that we ultimately go to our grave, sorry for being a bit morbid, but I mean, if you could look back in your life and say one thing about your life, that you were well-traveled and you got to actually see what the world was all about, I think that would be a great thing to say about one's life. So anyway, enough about that. Just very briefly to introduce the team. My name is Gordon. I'm the founder of Wheel and Anchor, and there is a whole team now, a growing team that is supporting me in delivering this philosophy, these amazing trips. The ones who you're most likely to run into, of course, Paula and Barb, our senior trip specialists, who are there to answer your questions and counsel you if you'd like to join us on any of our trips. So they're the ones that are on the other end of the phone when you would call into our office. So today I am going to take you on this little tour along one of the world's most incredible coastlines. Hurtigruten, the company that runs these ships, and they've done so for 125 years, call it the most beautiful voyage in the world. I have not been on all the voyages of the world, but I have a difficult time in disagreeing with that assertion, because I really think it is quite amazing. So I'm going to take you on a little journey on what this trip is all about, so you get some insights. First of all, starting with a few pictures from this year's trip. And you can see all the smiling faces there. And we had people from all walks of Canada that came on we had a group that came from central Canada, from Saskatchewan. There was a small, bunch of sort of pre-existing friends. Some had been with us before. We had folks from the West. We had folks from the East. We had folks that were a bit older. We had folks that were quite a bit younger. It was an amazing, diverse group, and they had a marvelous time. They saw a lot of Norway. They saw some great things here. This is the Vigeland Sculpture Park in Oslo, which is an incredible epitaph to the evolution of human beings. It's one of the amazing things that you see in Norway that you really don't know anything about. You never would have heard of it until you see it, and then you'll go, wow. And they got to experience all about Vikings and the folklore, and this is one of the tours that we do up in the Lofoten Islands in the north, yeah, the majestic scenery, there you just get a little bit of a taste of what they experienced this year, and you see people have warm jackets on. I mean, this trip obviously goes. Norway is bisected by the Arctic Circle, and so as we get now into the day-by-day itinerary, I want to start off as usual. I love this picture, by the way. This is in the Lofoten Islands. This is sort of the typical photo that you would see of northern Norway. And this is actually what it looks like. And the scenery changes all the time. So here, the map of Norway. As you know, Norway's in Scandinavia, in the northern part of Europe. But what a lot of people don't realize about Norway is how far north it actually is. So I'm just going to use my mouse. I'm going to draw a line. This is where the Arctic Circle passes through Norway. So literally, it bisects the country. And if you think about where the Arctic Circle is at home in Canada, well, most of us have never been up there. I've never been north of the Arctic Circle in Canada. I mean, there's not much up there. But in Norway, half of the country and half of our cruise is in the Arctic. And that's fascinating for a number of different reasons. For one thing, because of the Gulf Stream, of course, the whole western coast of Norway remains ice-free all year round. So this particular ship, the Hurtigruten, operates every single day of the year. So this is another interesting point about this trip, is that you are on a working vessel. Now, it's not a cargo ship. It's not a ferry. It is a hybrid of a bunch of different things. And I'll get into that in a couple of minutes when we talk about the ship. The journey itself begins in the capital, which is way down here in the south in Oslo. And to get to Oslo, you fly via a European gateway, typically Copenhagen or Frankfurt. You can fly nonstop from Toronto and obviously other cities in Canada. We get to Oslo. We spend a few nights there in the capital. We then travel overland by train. And this journey by train makes the whole trip even before you get on the cruise. It's an incredible train journey. I'll tell you about it in a second. We spend a couple of more nights in Bergen, the second largest city in Norway. And then from here, we embark on the Hurtigruten cruise that goes all the way up, stopping at 34 ports of call until you get way up here in the north at Kirkenes, which is on the border to Russia. So Russia is right over here. And I know Russia is not one of those good words these days, but nevertheless, up here in the north, they're pretty cool with the Russians. So, and then the ship turns around and goes all the way back down through 34 ports of call, back to Bergen, and that's where we depart from. And that summarizes the journey, and I'm going to go into the details in just a second, and I'll tell you a little bit more about the ship and the history and all the rest of this kind of stuff. So let's get into our day-by-day itinerary, and as I say, we begin in Oslo, which is one of the smaller European capitals, like 500,000 people in Oslo. It is incredible. Norway as a whole is a small country by population. It's a big country by landmass, but there's only like 4.5 million people in the whole country. We hear a lot about Norway, particularly from an economic standpoint, because Norway was a poor country until about 50 years ago. And then all of a sudden somebody discovered oil in the North Sea off of Norway. And next thing you know, they're a rich country. In fact, they have a sovereign wealth fund that is commonly known as well over $1 trillion. So they got a lot of money in the bank. And the Norwegians are very prudent people, and they spend it wisely. And you'll see that everywhere you go. I mean, Norway is and consistently has had one of the highest standards of living in the world. And it begins in Oslo, which, as I say, is a small city, but is a remarkable city. It sits obviously primarily on the mainland, but there's a whole archipelago of islands. And you get a little bit of a sense of it here. Oslo, we'll fly into Oslo, arrive in the morning, and then we don't do a lot on the first day as usual. We'll, give you a bit of an orientation tour. We're staying right in the center of town, right next to the main railway station, which makes it really easy to get to. because they have a high-speed rail that links the airport that's 46 kilometers outside of town with the downtown. We stay right next to the railway station. And from here, you can explore most of what Oslo has to offer on foot. We will, of course, take a city tour with a guide that we've used before, and they give you a wonderful insight into Norway as a whole, and into the city, and into a little bit about the royal family. So Norway is also still a monarchy, as you probably know, right? So Norway has a royal family, much like we have in the Commonwealth, the Windsors. But the royal family, and I shot a picture of the royal palace here in Norway, are very different than our royal family. We can still say they're still our royal family. They are very outdoorsy people. They're very active. They're out there doing things for the country. They're very vocal about politics. And Norwegians are very, very proud, fiercely proud of their royal family. And you'll hear a lot about that. And again, this goes to the whole demeanor of the Norwegians. And so, we'll see a lot of Norwegians, obviously, as we go on our trip through Norway. And, you can talk to them about the royal family, and almost certainly they're all going to be like very proud about who they are and what they do. I met Queen Sonia once in Toronto many years ago when she came, because she was helping promote tourism. Like, that's the kind of people they are. It's amazing. So we're going to tour around Oslo. Sorry, I digressed about the royal family, but this is one of the very interesting things about the country that makes it worth visiting and seeing firsthand what it's all about. So we're going to spend 3 nights, 2 full days exploring Oslo, part of the time with a guide. They're going to take us out across from the downtown area. This is the view from the Holmenkollen ski jump, which was used when they held the Olympics in Oslo eons ago. And it's one of the places that you can go during the free day. Is you can go up to Holmenkollen, have this amazing vista over the archipelago, the head of the Oslo Fjord, which is this body of water here that Oslo sits upon. And we'll go over to the Bugdøy Museum Peninsula, where they have all kinds of amazing museums. And not just boring museums, but like the Viking Ship Museum, which hopefully will be reopened. It's been under renovation for a while, but by next year, they're planning to reopen it. And they also have the Fram Museum, which is the ship that was used by the Norwegian explorer Thor Heyerdahl to cross over parts of the world. Super interesting stuff. So there'll be lots of time to get to know Oslo up close and personal. Great eateries. And like on many of our trips, we have hand selected the places that we eat, because this program because I've been to Norway so many times, and it feels in a way like one of my second homes. I know the town intimately, and we always have a great time and really get to know a little bit about what Norway's all about. And this is, other than Bergen, we're mostly going to be in smaller towns. So this is the main urban exploration that we're going to do while we're in Norway. So after a few nights in Oslo, we are then going to board the train and go all the way across the country. So we're going to go from the Oslo Fjord in the eastern side of Norway all the way to Bergen, which is on the west coast. And this journey is yet again another epic journey. So we take the national rail line that goes from Oslo to Bergen. And then we head way up. The train winds its way up into the mountains, and we disembark part way at a little town called Myrdal, which is high up in the mountains. So we go from basically sea level in Oslo up to about, if I recall, about 1,700 meters above sea level. We disembark, and then we get onto this train that you see here, the Flam Railway. And the Flam Railway is voted by one of the most scenic railways in the world, because it's also one of the steepest rail lines that is not a cogwheel rail line. And this train, in the span of about an hour or so, winds its way all the way down from up in the mountains down into the edge of the Orland Fjord, which is an arm of the Sogne Fjord, commonly known as the longest fjord in the world, or certainly in Europe. There's some argument about longer fjords in Antarctica or something like that. Regardless of that, what happens on this day, because we go from one rail to this train, we get off the train in Flam, the edge of the Orland Fjord, we get on a ferry and we go up some incredible scenery. This will be our first fjord on the trip. And then we end up at a town called Gudvangen. And then from there, we embark on a bus, and then we go back up super hairpin road up over the pass, and then rejoin the train line, and then make our way into Bergen. Meanwhile, our luggage is transported completely separately. In fact, we pack it up, we leave it at the hotel in Oslo in the morning, and we get there, when we get to Bergen, it's already there waiting for us when we arrive. So it's super well organized and amazing. Amazing day, and we'll have lunch provided on the way. So then we'll be in Bergen. And as I say, Bergen is the second largest town in Norway and sits amongst a vast archipelago of islands that really stretches up the entire coast of Norway. And so while in Bergen, once again, we'll have a couple of nights here, and we'll spend one day touring around with our guide. And I'm jumping ahead. There's a photo missing here. It's annoying me, but anyway. So we'll spend time looking around Bergen, and it's an even smaller city, right? Bergen has got, if I recall, around 200,000 people. And you can walk from the hotel and see the fish market, which is the focal point of all the activity in the town. You definitely have to stop and have lunch there and have the fresh fish that's just come in and gotten caught. Norway is famous for its stave churches. They'll find them scattered around the country. Here's a beautiful example of one, the Fantoft in Bergen. This is another one of the things that we can do on your free time, because you've got a good day and a half to use to explore all around Bergen on your own. Bergen is also the home of Edvard Grieg, who, if you'll recall, was the composer of the Peer Gynt opera. You can go and visit his homestead, beautifully situated about half an hour, 40 minutes outside of town, on the edge of a lake. Lots of things to see and do in Bergen. My favorite is just to go up the funicular and look out over this incredible landscape. So this is the gateway to the fjords, and it's here that we'll now embark on our ship. So a couple of words again to elaborate on what I was saying before. The Hurtigruten is the operator of the passenger ships that go up and down the coast of Norway, and they've been doing that for 125 years. And it's gone through a number of iterations over the years, the company itself. But fundamentally, this was, I mean, if you go back to the map and you look at the coast of Norway, driving it is going to take forever. I mean, weeks and weeks and weeks. So the main way that cargo, passengers, cars even for a time were brought up and down the coast was via the coastal steamer. And this is it, and it is still used as such today. So what you'll find is that these ships were designed specifically to bring passengers from one port to another. So you get on board and you'll have tourists who comprise, depending on the time of the year and the ship and all the rest of it, somewhere around half of the passengers on board. And when I say passengers on board, the Richard With has for example, who was the founder of Hurtigruten. This ship has a capacity of, as I recall, about 650 passengers. So roughly half of them are visitors, travelers. The other half are locals. You'll find school kids going from one town to the next. You'll find university students heading back up home because they were at university in Bergen or in Trondheim or what are the cities along the way. And you'll find, local people, business people that just go from one place to the next because, if your town is on one fjord, and then you have to go to the next fjord. If you have to drive around, I mean, it could take you 8 hours. So you can hop on the Hurtigruten and be there in an hour or two. It also carries cargo, and not major cargo, but it containers and boxes and supplies and food and all the rest of it from one place to another. So you see all these activities, all the stuff that they're loading and unloading at all the different ports. It's a wonderful system that they have built here, and it also enables you. Because there are big cruise ships that come and stop in a couple of ports along the way, but you just end up seeing billions of other tourists. This way, you are actually traveling with the Norwegians, and they're friendly people. You can approach them and talk to them, and they're as fascinated to find out about where you're from and what it's all about as you are about their country and why it is that they're on the same ship as you. The Richard With, as with all of the other ships in the fleet, have all been completely renovated just before COVID, actually. And so they are now beautiful contemporary Scandinavian design. Inside, they've gone to farm-to-table cooking. So they pride themselves a lot. When I first went on Hurtigruten 20 some odd years ago, You know, I can honestly say back then the food was kind of mediocre, but now they really pride themselves on what they call Norway's coastal kitchen. So you have a buffet breakfast and a buffet lunch on board every day. It is a little heavy on, not heavy on, it's oriented towards seafood. So if you love, you know, your smoked fish and all the rest of this kind of stuff, it is fantastic. But there is something to suit everybody on the dining room menu. So we have breakfast and lunch that are buffet, and then a dinner is always a set menu, and the food is really, really excellent. There's lounges and observation decks. And it's at this point that I want to mention that this program, particularly this cruise, is sort of the epitome of slow travel. So we are going to be passing through all these 34 ports of call. And, you know, we stop at, you know, the whole voyage is 11 nights in duration. So we stop at, you know, an average of 5 or 6 ports a day, some of them for 15, 20 minutes, some of them for an hour or two. And you can cozy up in a chair with observation windows everywhere and look out and admire this incredible scenery as it goes by. And you can kind of sign up. There's also 100 excursions that you can do. So you can do as much or as little as you'd like to as you enjoy the scenery. They've got an expedition desk. So now each of the sailings now has what they call expedition leaders. And these are curators of the programming, the off-ship excursions that happen. And they tell you a lot. They also do lectures about what's available, the excursions that are happening the following day. We know all this in advance because the program is set. It's almost the same program every day of the year, except that obviously there are seasonal variations. And there's also lectures about, you know, glaciology and about the Arctic Circle and the Gulf Stream. And there's always something going on for a relatively small ship. There are various categories of cabins. The cabins, I would say, are modest. So again, this is not a cruise ship. We're not going here to spend all day, you know, relaxing and sitting in our cabin. They're very comfortably designed, but they're small, the cabins. What you'll find is you actually, and I say this on a lot of our trips because I'm personally not a big fan of big cruise ships. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but you know, you're on this trip to be outside on deck in the observation lounges, to be out, you know, seeing and doing stuff all the time. That being said, as I say, the cabins, while modest, they're very comfortable. And the Richard With also, here's a shot of me. I had to put this one in. This is me sitting in the hot tub on the back of the ship with the midnight sun in the background. I think this is 11 o'clock at night, north of the Arctic Circle. Yeah, this is life on board a Hurtigruten ship. Anyway, we're going to move on from that photo. So I'll be happy to give you more details about the ship or answer any questions that you might have. So we leave Bergen and we're going to make our journey north, and we'll get up in the morning, and one of our first ports of call is one of my favorites. And this is the town of Ålesund, which is an Art Nouveau city. Actually, the city was completely decimated by a fire back in the early 1900s. I think it was 1905. And when the mayor at that time decided to rebuild it, he said, let's make it special. And so all the buildings in the old part, which is basically down here, are all almost all in Art Nouveau style. It's a magical city. But it's a beautiful location. Actually, the Hurtigruten ship is just over here on the right. So you can walk through town along here and up to this viewpoint, which they call Axla, and have exactly this view over the town. However, we actually do something different because in May when we go, the ship there is no other possibility to go into the Geiranger Fjord. And so as of this year, we make it possible. So we have chartered a boat to go from Ålesund all the way down. It's a pretty much all day excursion to the end of the Geiranger Fjord, which is one of the most beautiful fjords in the whole country. And so as from my perspective, this is a not to miss program. In fact, when the group went on this trip this year and they had an absolute blast, it was undoubtedly a highlight of the trip. Even the crew of the ship asked our host Amber, and they're like, "Oh, how, you know, what did you guys do? Where did you go?" And she explained, "Yeah, that, you know, that I had chartered this boat to enable us to go and make this trip that's exclusively for us." So we're going to be doing the same thing again next year. Google the Geiranger Fjord if you want to see amazing fjord scenery. This is basically it. So that'll be our day in Norway. We then head north. Our next stop the next day will be in Trondheim, which is the third, I think, or fourth largest city in Norway. Correct my geography if I'm wrong, but and Trondheim is a beautiful, very colorful town, also a university town. And this is one of the places we stop here for about 3.5 hours. There are a number of different excursions that you can do. But you can also just go out and wander. You can wander all the way into the center of town. They have an amazing Gothic cathedral called the Nidaros Cathedral that you can visit, and you can walk all along the river that flows into Trondheim, which is where you find all of these colorful, very Norwegian looking houses. Go and have a sip of coffee. This is what the sort of agenda is like on board, is that you go and you can disembark at any port that you want to, any and every port. I mean, keeping in mind that it's stopping day and night. And this is when I go on the trip, this is what I often do is I'll just like literally, even if the ship's only stopping for half an hour, I'll get off, I'll go to a nearby cafe, I'll just sit there and I'll look around like who's here and what are they doing? And is it fishermen or is it oil rig people or, and this is the interesting thing because you do this all the way along the trip. Or of course you can join one of the many excursions. We've got a whole list of them that the ship operates. We head further north along the coast, and before we head out to the Lofoten Islands, we are at a town called Bodø, and it's here that you have a very interesting phenomena which is called Saltstraumen. And Saltstraumen is as it says in the subtitle here, the world's most powerful tidal current. Twice a day, there's a big giant fjord that is connected by a very narrow canal. And this is actually not the right picture of that canal, but this is nearby. And a huge gush of water, as when the tide comes in, goes in, enters that fjord. And then when the tide goes out, it exits the fjord and it creates these, massive whirlpools in the water. And so you can explore that, you can visit that either by land, by looking at it from above on a land excursion, or you can go out in a rib, what they call a rib boat, which is like a Zodiac boat, and get the feeling of cruising around in this incredible tidal current. It's really an amazing thing to do. And as I say, there are a bunch of other things that you can do in port, or you can just relax on board. This is the beauty of the trip. There's options. As we make our way further north, we will have now passed the Arctic Circle. In fact, before we got to Bodø, we passed the Arctic Circle. And we'll have passed the Lofoten Islands, which I will talk about in a minute, because, as I say, the ship is going night and day. And some of the things we will pass in the daytime on the way north, and some of them in the nighttime. And this is why we do a round trip voyage, because that's often a question I get is like, why do I want to do the same trip twice, so up and back, when I could fly back, which you could do. But the itinerary is such that, as I say, what you see in the daytime on the way north is in the night, and vice versa. So what you see in the night on the way south is in the daytime on the way north. Okay. We stop in Tromsø, the northernmost city in the world, as opposed to town, which we're going to come to next, and also a big university town. And this is the gateway to the Norwegian Arctic, the islands of Spitsbergen, which is it's an archipelago way north of Norway, way up in the Arctic at 80 degrees north latitude. And Tromsø here also has a huge mountain that you can go and go up the cable car and get a view over this archipelago and get a sense of the changing environment, right? Just like in the Canadian North, the tundra, the trees are getting shorter. The land is sort of very barren, but it has its own sort of beauty to it. They have a very cool Arctic cathedral here that you can visit that's kind of like in the form of an iceberg, all of which is walking distance. It's a good walk, but it's walking distance from the boat. Ship continues further north, and then we end up docking at Honningsvåg. And Honningsvåg is the northernmost port on this journey, and as it says here, is the gateway to the North Cape, which is actually at the end of this bay that you see here. And now the landscape is completely barren. So you once again, it's almost like every hour the scenery changes. You go from tall mountains to rounded out barren landscape to farm fields. And I'm even up in the above the Arctic Circle. You have incredible countryside. So here we'll make a visit up to the North Cape Interpretation Center, which is like a big museum perched out 300 meters above the North Sea. And you look out and they have a big globe, which marks the point that is the northernmost point on continental Europe. You're here at about 71 degrees north latitude. So this is like Ellesmere Island in Canada. That's how far north you are. It's really quite remarkable. So we'll spend a few hours up there. Ship continues again the next day, all the way up to Kirkenes. This is the turnaround point. Kirkenes is on the border with Russia, and there's a couple of excursions that take you near the border. Of course, we don't go over the border. These days, you don't want to do that. At this point, some people will disembark, and some people will re-embark, and the ship turns around and we go back south. We actually go back north first because the North Cape is further north, and then we go back south. And an interesting factoid about Kirkenes, and again, this is the weird thing about, you think about the globe of the earth, but Kirkenes is actually further east than Istanbul, Turkey. So that's how far up the globe you are. And anyway, look at it on a globe, you'll see what I mean. And so I put the map here again. So this is Kirkenes way up here in the north, on the border to Russia's here, Finland is here. This is where we turn around, and the northernmost point, the North Cape, is just up here at Honningsvåg. I think it's this point here. So we turn around and come back north. Come back south. On the way back again, we'll see towns that we would have passed at 3 o'clock in the morning, and you probably didn't want to stay up and see them. We will be at this point in May in the beginning part of the midnight sun, so you won't get the full midnight sun because that starts around the end of the trip, the 15th of May. But I went on this trip last year, and you saw where that was about 11 o'clock at night, and the sun was still up in the sky. So you'll be able to see daylight pretty much when you're in the north 24 hours a day. It's very cool. Hammerfest is another little town that we'll visit. It bills itself the northernmost town in the world. Of course, everybody wants to be the northernmost everything, but this is the biggest settlement, more than 10,000 people in the world. And we head all on our way back south. The part I love most about the southbound journey is the fact that we go through the Lofoten Islands. And I showed there the picture at the very beginning and this picture here. And if you Google Lofoten Islands, it's like you could create a whole picture book. The scenery it's just like out of I don't know where. It is incredible. So we have a couple of different excursions that we do here in the Lofoten Islands, and there's many more that you can book through the ship. You have to look through the whole program to get all the details on that. But the scenery is amazing, and as I say, on the way north, it all happens sort of in the middle of the night. So it's important to go south so you don't miss this great part of the journey. And we continue further south again, and we'll get to see Torghatten, which is part of the Seven Sisters, which is an incredible chain of mountains. And one of them has this big hole. It's literally like a mountain with a giant hole that you can see right through. And in fact, you can get off the ship and climb up to exactly this point. I've done it, where you get this view out over the Atlantic. As we go further south in Molde, they have one of the feats of Norwegian infrastructure, which is the so-called Atlantic Road. And the Atlantic Road is this set of bridges and causeways and tunnels that connects all these islands and communities. And it's just amazing. And this is what you can do when you have $1 trillion in your sovereign wealth fund, is you can build the most amazing infrastructure. And it's one of the many, many things that impresses me about Norway is the fact that they have really spent the money to help their citizens. And so you'll find bridges and tunnels that connect settlements of a few thousand people. And if you think about what it takes in Canada to build a bridge or a tunnel anywhere, well, let's not talk about it. The Norwegians do it anyway. It's remarkable. And gradually we will make our way back to Bergen and spend one more night in this wonderful town before we have to say bye-bye to our ship, having spent 12 wonderful days. This is a great shot of Bergen with, again, at sort of sunset, or, this, I'm not sure, well, judging by the snow, this would be in wintertime. So we're not going to have snow in May. We'll have one more night in Bergen and have a lovely farewell dinner, and then fly out from there. And that will be our trip. And I can tell you, it'll be one of the most memorable trips that you ever did. So let me summarize a few of the details about our trip for next year. And of course, all of it is in the program itinerary. We have different categories of cabins. You get a sense of the pricing here. The prices have gone up again, as they have everywhere. And, I will say that, Norway is not an inexpensive country. Quite the contrary. It's a quite expensive country. And you'll see that when you see the prices of a bottle of wine in the local restaurants and bars. Although that being said, knowing how the prices have gone in Canada, it's not actually maybe not even that far different. It just occurs as a lot more expensive in Norway, but it's one of those places where, you get what you pay for, and it's worth every dime. Our program, as I mentioned, this is all curated by us. So we don't actually use local tour operators in this. We have picked the hotel, the guide, the restaurants, the whole experience is organized by us because, I just know this destination. And I know the places that you want to go and what to see. And every year we make slight improvements and alterations and all the rest of it to the trip. And so on board the ship, you have 3 meals a day, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. You have coffee and tea that I think flow all day long. And we have those special excursions. We have 4 excursions included in the itinerary. Although I will admit to you at this point, we are contemplating giving you a credit so you can choose your own excursions. We're just deciding that right now. Either way, you'll either have 4 good excursions or you'll have a credit that's equivalent to 4 excursions that you can choose on your own. And then of course, all the other bits and pieces and stuff, and a lovely wheel and anchor host that's going to go along with you for this trip. We just have to help you with airfare, which is in addition, and insurance, and then any other shore excursions, which are most easily bought basically on board the ship. Talking about airfare, just really briefly, to Europe, to Norway, seems like it's holding pretty stable. You should get in there for around $1,100, and from out west, obviously a little bit more than that. That's pretty much what you're looking at, although we make no guarantees about airfares these days because they fluctuate like crazy. And once again, we are going to offer an early booking bonus on this program. And this is also from the ship. They're trying to get as many people booked early on as possible. So they give us a bit of a deal. If you sign up with us before the 15th of July, you get $500 off those rates. And we are almost time for Q&A. In fact, we are time for Q&A. I'll just put the screen up really quickly. Obviously, you may or may not have questions right now, or you might think of something, or you may be watching the replay and have a question. Please drop us a note. We're happy to answer your questions. If Parb and Paula don't know the answer, they'll come to me and we'll get your question answered. So on that note, I will take any questions that anybody might have now. Let me see, did any questions come in? I see a question from Laura about the highest elevation on the trip. Not super high, Laura. The highest elevation we reach on the trip is that 1,700 meters or so in Myrdal, which is nothing from an altitude standpoint. Most of the trip is basically on the ship at sea level. So there's nothing you have to worry about there. And there's also not really any other than some excursions on winding roads. There's nothing, or on the smaller Zodiac boats where you have to be worried about motion sickness. This is a question that has come up about, is it, how are conditions on board the boat for people that suffer from seasickness? I will say this, a lot of the journey, a lot of the route goes on an inland waterway that goes very close to shore or in behind islands and archipelagos and so on. There are a few spots where the ship is exposed to the full North Sea. Of course, anytime you can get, a storm that passes through and could cause some movement. I have experienced it on the, I think 11 times I've been on this voyage on various parts of the trip. I've experienced it maybe twice where the ship was moving to a point that you'd be like, oh, yeah, I could see where somebody might feel ill. But it's in May, and this is part of the reason I choose May, because May is one of the lowest precipitation months of the year. You're coming up to the midnight sun, and the seas tend to be relatively calm. So the feedback this year was that I think they didn't have any rough seas at all. It can happen. And so, if you are sensitive, you just, you take the patch or you put on one of those bands, or, there's various ways to combat motion sickness. What is the currency on in Norway? It is Norwegian kroner. So the Norwegians have not and are not part of the EU and will not adopt the euro. So it's about 5.5 Norwegian kroner to a Canadian dollar. And Norway, again, super modern country, ATMs everywhere, getting money. And honestly, you don't even need to get cash. You can pretty much pay with your credit card everywhere. Like there's almost nowhere that I can think of. I think I had a whole bunch of Norwegian kroner and I just ended up taking them home with me. Laura asked about what are the electrical requirement on the ship and in hotels. So the electrical standard is the same as in the rest of Europe. It's 220 volts with the 2 round pin plugs. So that is the standard. So I always would suggest taking, a universal adapter is the best, but you can also get a dedicated European adapter with the 2 pins. Most appliances these days, your phone chargers and your camera chargers and all that stuff will take dual voltage. The only thing is some hair dryers and hair straighteners and stuff like that may not. So that's the only thing you have to pay attention to, but we'll cover all that. We've never had any situation where people have had any issue with appliances, and we make sure that you're well prepared for that. Perfect. Let's see. Are there any other questions? I don't see any other questions. There are probably 100 other questions you could ask. In addition to our program itinerary, we have a document called additional information, which is like 3 pages of other things that people have asked, call it an FAQ. So if you're interested in the program, ask for the additional information document if they don't send it automatically. And you can read up on a whole bunch of other questions. You can find out about the additional excursions that can be booked and all the other great things about Norway. So that pretty much wraps up our webinar. I hope I didn't talk too quickly. I'm really passionate about this country. I love this trip. You will love this trip. Everybody that went this year loves this trip. It's a great way to go. I will reiterate again, it is a slow travel type of experience. So if you're looking for something super active, while there are lots of excursions and all the rest of it, this is spend your day with doing whatever excursions. You might have one a day, you might not even have one, with a book, sitting in one of the many lounges, and admiring the scenery. Every time you go to a new chapter, it's like you're in a different world. And that's the way to experience Norway. It's fantastic. Thank you so much for joining me. We've got lots more webinars in store. In fact, I think next week we don't have any scheduled because we had a bit of a backlog of trips. But coming out soon, we have our live away in Sardinia and Corsica. We have our Southern Italian sojourn, which takes in the Amalfi Coast and Puglia, a brand new program that's just going to get released very soon. We've got New Zealand that we released today. So many new programs that are out there for you. Take a look. Join us on one of our webinars, drop us an email, and thank you again for joining us. It's been a pleasure. As you can tell, I'm really passionate about all of our destinations, but some of them in particular, like Norway. And I appreciate you coming out and joining me for this webinar today. So have yourselves a great rest of the day and hope to catch up with you again very, very soon.